Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A. It is June 22nd, 2020. And this week was a topic-specific one. I haven't done this in a little while, so I thought with all the shows and stuff starting to pick back up, people starting to prep again, that I would do a contest prep related one. So I got a lot of questions. This was one where I didn't go in and cut it off quite as early as I should have, so I got more than I would like. But what I'll do here is, some of these weren't contest prep related because I know some of you don't read the thread. So I'll leave those for the next one. All right. So just ask again on the next one. That way this video isn't too terribly long. All right. So let's see. Can you lay out a general guideline for a peak week? I know everyone is different when it comes to that, but how do you normally go about it with ecto, meso, and endo? Yeah, that's a super broad question. I mean, best advice that I could give would be pay attention to things like refeeds and prep, or if you use any type of spike meals or free meals or anything like that in prep at all. I mean, any of that stuff is going to be good info. Or even a cyclical diet, if you're using like a carb cycling or things like that, you know, just pay attention to how they react and how they look in different situations. So, I mean, that's going to be the main thing, and then you're going to know about how much they need to load on, also what kind of macronutrients they need, whether they look good with some fats or some carbs or so on and so forth. I mean, outside of that, it's really hard to give you any specifics whatsoever because I literally know nothing about the people. I mean, I've had people load on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, not at all, on fats, on carbs, front load, back load, side load, upside down load, all kinds of shit. You know, I mean, it's just, it really just depends. I mean, there's a lot of context there, but I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure we've done some podcasts on peak week layouts and loading and things like that. So I remember specifically we did one on the OPD podcast with Cliff Wilson as a guest. That was a really good one. I think on the Mind Body broadcast, we also probably did one on peak week that was really broad, that actually covered like multiple scenarios and things. I'd probably check that one out too if you want like more of a broad scope. But that's where I would start. I wish I could give you more, but I mean, there's so many variables there. So all right, next one. Using one or more oral in prep. I mean, you could potentially, but what's the, you know, like what outcome are you looking for? Think of the properties that they have. Typical like Winstrol, you know, I mean, it's a DHT derivative, you know, it's like at a point you're just being redundant, right? You're just being redundant and causing more systemic stress for what? I mean, there's not going to be more benefit. You're not really gaining muscle. It's especially not, probably not in prep at all, and especially not at that point in prep. So, you know, you're probably, like I said, just being redundant and causing more systemic stress. Could you use one and then add like a halo at the end, or perhaps like Superdrol or something for the cosmetic effect and fullness? Sure. Yeah, you could. But more isn't necessarily better, and more of them isn't necessarily better either, because again, more systemic stress creates more variables, harder to figure out what's going on if something goes wrong. So keep it simple, you know, unless you really, really know what's up. But I think that answers the question. So next one, Waking up during the night is a huge problem for me in prep. Often hungry and end up eating something carby or with no restraint. Sorry, some of this question got cut off. Allostatic load is generally very high. Is this likely genuine hunger, insulin response, or low serotonin into melatonin conversion due to lower carbs? They are still quite high though at 200 to 300, or perhaps cortisol related given stress load. Histamine video was excellent this week. Well, thank you. I mean, it's probably a combination of things. So first off, you know, if we look at circadian patterns, one of the things that tends to happen here is once they kind of start getting disrupted, it's hard to recorrect them. So like and hunger cues and meal timing is part of that, right? So if you, for example, if you're waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning every single night and you're eating, guess what? Body's probably going to keep waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning and eating. And it's going to be hard to fix because, again, now your circadian patterns are adapted to that specific rhythm, right? And you might notice that your morning cues or something are off a little bit or whatever. So I know that things do get funky, it gets hard to correct. All right, so that's one. Yeah, serotonin, melatonin conversion, yeah, for sure. Probably partially a melatonin issue there, not keeping you asleep during the night, perhaps. You know, I would also think about, like, what do you feel when you wake up? So are you waking up in the middle of the night and your heart rate's elevated and you're like alert, kind of, you know, like tired but alert, like it wakes you up quickly? That could be a circadian issue and a cortisol issue where your cortisol is spiking in the middle of the night. You have what I would call like an adrenal dump in the middle of the night, and that's disrupting that sleep pattern, because typically it should be low and you should be having that spike in the morning to get you up. But what happens a lot of the time in prep, especially with this high allostatic load, is it does get disrupted. You start waking up at funky times, it screws everything up. You're tired during the day, you're awake at night, you know, it just gets really wacky. So yeah, it's likely a combination of things. So what can you really do about it? You could try some sleep supplementation at night. This is a situation where generally I like people to form the right habits in bedtime environment and all this and that. And you can correct most any type of neurotransmitter or hormonal type of circadian issue for sleep that way. This is a special situation where your body's really stressed out and you just don't always have that option. All right, so you might, something like I like Morpha-REM for Morphogen Nutrition. It will help with that issue and also provide other key components for not only calming, but also keeping you asleep. That helped me a lot in prep. I would be careful with things like sleeping meds and stuff. A lot of these things do potentially put you to sleep, but they may potentially worsen overall sleep quality. So just be cautious with stuff like that. And there's obviously like a whole massive difference in classes of sleep meds and anxiety medications and things that people might use, but just that's noteworthy. Shift your sleep times, perhaps. If you absolutely have to shift your sleep times, you know, you can do that. Last resort, and I've done this in prep, I'll own it, because you know what? Because this was all that I felt that I could do to manage the situation, was I just put a meal in the middle of the night. You know, I just pulled out some of my macros that I already didn't have much of during the day, and I put a little bit at night. Your case, you're craving sweets, put something sweet in there, even if it's like kind of tricky where you're doing like, you know, like a protein pudding or something that's sweet, but not actually carbs. You know, but you have 200 to 300 grams of carbs, you could put 50 grams of carbs in there and have something sweet. You wouldn't even, you know, you could absorb that during the day easy. That would be my last resort. But like I said, that kind of plays into the first portion where now you're setting up yourself for this disruption in circadian pattern, and you're gonna keep waking up at night and you're gonna keep being hungry at that time. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and it might take you a little bit of time after prep to readjust out of that, and you'll keep waking up and keep being hungry till you fully adjust. Happens to me in most of my preps. I just go with it because I know that that will work, and I can deal with it after prep's over and readjust. And it's that way. I'm never worried about like sleepwalking in the middle of the night and eating or something. You know, I've seen that shit happen to people. So that's some stuff that you can do potentially, but there's not a lot of good answer to that. I would try this. I would try the Morpha-REM. I would try potentially moving sleep wake time, stuff like that first. All right, next. Considerations for, oh wait, not considerations. That's not the right word. Constipation. For female athletes at the tail end of prep, what can you do to help? I mean, there's a few things that could potentially be happening. One of the things is that just generally less food intake, right? So less volume of food means less bowel. So first off, like I like to ask that question or look at it in that way, in that are you actually constipated or do you just not have that much waste product? You know, so that's one of the things. Because tail end of prep, especially for females, I mean, of course it varies. I mean, it's generally going to be pretty low calorie. There will be outliers there that won't be. They'll have more. But generally, like large percentage of calorie utilization that you're eating, probably, you know, just not a lot of waste. So there's that. If you're feeling constipated, bloating and things like that, that it might not be constipation as much as it is, well, it could be, but it might just be total allostatic load of stress. You're just stressed out. Your autonomic nervous system's messed up. Your GI motility is off, right? GI motility, so we're talking about muscle, you know, contractile muscles that move things through that will help produce normal bowel movements. That's part of the process, right? And when you throw this autonomic nervous system all out of whack, well, now you're not going to have that, and you might have constipation. So in a really short term, is it always plausible to even fix that? You do the best you can, right? Always lowering stress is probably going to make the person look better too. But to some extent, it's not always entirely possible. So barring any type of like nutrient deficiencies, we're making sure we're covering that, you know, things like magnesium and whatnot. Fiber, make sure they're still getting some fiber in because, again, food intake's lower. We might use something like senna leaf, which is a laxative. Might use that, or milk of magnesia. I don't like to abuse those things, but like honestly, if I cover nutrients, if I know what I'm looking at in the person and I can control stress for the most part, I don't really run into this issue a whole lot with people. I do, it happens occasionally, but usually if everything else controlled, if it does happen, it's right at the very end when they're very, very stressed, and we're able to just fix it with the things that I mentioned just temporarily, and everything goes back to normal. So if you're having this, you know, like 4 weeks out or so, and a month, you know, like a month out from the show and stuff, I mean, there's other things that you need to be looking at correcting rather than taking anything for it. You know what I mean? So I'd want to figure out like why that's happening. So next. All right. Can caffeine, 500 to 800 milligrams, cause water retention? Also interested in your opinion on what minerals affect fluid balance. Is it only sodium, potassium? Eating low calories, low carb, moderate sodium, clean for 2 weeks, then have some free meals. After 1 to 2 weeks, my body's still retaining water because seeing indentions on the ankles and body after sleeping. Okay, well, there's 2 questions there. But first off, caffeine. Well, I mean, generally caffeine is going to be a mild diuretic, but caffeine contributing to total stress load could cause water retention, right? For sure. So directly, no. Indirectly, maybe. But I don't know. I would need to look at a lot of other things here to see what the total stress load, what all's contributing to this: training, nutrition, cardio, environmental factors, sleep, stress, relationships, blah, 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 so on and so forth, and all those things, right? So yeah, maybe, but not directly. Minerals that affect water balance. Well, I mean, there's more than just sodium, potassium. So other electrolytes like chloride and magnesium. But I mean, generally sodium, potassium are the main players. And you take them in higher amounts than other minerals typically. So eating low calories, low carb. I mean, if you're lower carb, generally will hold less fluid anyhow, just less glycogen. So I mean, you have less body water all around. If you're having indentions in the ankles, especially when waking up, so at night, if you held a little water throughout the day, maybe like had like a sock ring or something at the end of the day because you were on your feet or something. I mean, yeah, I that's one thing, but I mean, waking up with indentions in the ankles and stuff, that's an absolute retention issue for sure. So I don't know anything about your sodium potassium balance. If you are adding some sodium into the diet, you may need to add a little bit of potassium into your diet, whether it's via food or supplement. Maybe get close to like a 1-to-1 sodium to potassium, or maybe even like a 1-to-2 sodium to potassium. So you might need to manipulate that. I mean, there's other things, obviously, like kidney function, for example. That's a big one. I would certainly be investigating kidney function too if you're holding all of that water, and then just total stress load. Someone with normal kidney function, even if their electrolytes, are off some, they're not going to have pitting edema in their ankles waking up in the morning. That's not, I mean, because their kidneys are going to regulate that, and to at least a decent extent, and keep the water balance relatively decent, even if you had the like slight imbalance in electrolytes, right? Otherwise, you'd have every person on the planet that pretty much doesn't track their electrolytes, they'd have water retention, and that's just not the case with everyone, right? So there's another component here. Could be a little bit of electrolytes, but could potentially just be massive stress loads. I mean, I don't know much about this person specifically, but those are some things I'd probably look at. All right. What's one of your most memorable experiences personally during prep? Memorable? I mean, yeah, you'd probably look for some kind of a typical answer like winning my first show or winning my first overall or something like that. I don't know if those things are necessarily the most memorable. There's just been so many. It's hard for me to pick one out, especially reading this off the hip. But I mean, yeah, I would probably say maybe my first show win or first overall at an NPC show. Probably something like that. Having my family there to see it, I guess, that'd be probably up there. Just because of what well, yeah, I'd probably say my first one, just my first overall, because that show, leading into that show, it's one of my most brutal preps ever, at least at that time. I'd only done a few, right? And I ended up in the hospital 2 weeks out, which that's a whole nother story. If any of you ever followed me and listened to podcasts, I've told this story. It's a scary one. But put my hospital wristband up on my trophy. I know, it's such a hardcore bodybuilder thing, right? And that was like 2 weeks out that happened, and then I ended up winning the overall at the show. And that was cool. That was definitely a good experience after the fact. And someone else asked like crazy prep stories and stuff. I'm sure I could probably think of like a better answer for you guys if I really thought about it, but crazy prep stories, there are a lot. I'll give you one though, so we don't run too far on time. But a funny one was when I had first met Jerica, who let's see, would have been 2000. Well, we met before that, but this was my first prep when we were together, which was shortly after we met. I think we'd met in 2012, and then 2013 was the prep. So like I went into that pretty shortly after, so she got like the full dose right off the bat. And I know, I don't know, I was probably like 3 or 4 weeks out, maybe 5 weeks out. It was close. I was lean. I was really hurting. You know, I was very, very hungry. I did this whole prep myself, and I was doing the Ohio State Championships, NPC Ohio State that year. I was a middleweight, and I woke up one night. I had to go pee, so I go to the bathroom, and I'm like so out of it. It's like I was going through like a brutal phase where I was just really pushing hard, and I was like dizzy a lot and just couldn't barely function at all. And probably anemic and all kinds of other shit, since I'd struggled with that before. But go to the bathroom. Of course, I'm so tired. It's like 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning. I sit on the toilet to pee. I didn't feel like standing up. And then I go to get up, and I'm just like, you know, zombie. I just pass out, and I fell on the floor, and I'm just laying there on the bathroom floor. And I think I like blacked out for a minute, and I kind of came to, and I start yelling for Jerica, and I said that I needed, she's like, what do you need? What do you need? I told her to get me a pork rind, like the food that you eat. So, yep, that's what I did. Ate a damn pork rind and got back in bed. One pork rind is probably like 2 calories. Not even, probably like half calorie, puffy air. And then I cardioed that pork rind off the next day for sure. But, yep, that was it. That's a funny one. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but I know that one was hilarious. She's like, why a pork rind? Like, I don't know. I'm completely out of my mind right now. Just give me a damn pork rind. So, that's what we did. Anywho, all right. Oops. One more. 2 more. Sorry. Have you ever had a situation where you or a client had to pull out of a prep? Yes, for sure. They asked, like, at what point is it not worth salvaging or pushing or trying to do little tricks of the trade? It's just best to call it off. Yeah, like at what point do you say, let's stop? You know, we obviously have other tools depending on if the person's enhanced or natural, fat loss supplements, and you can push pretty hard short term, you know, in terms of like cardio and doubling up cardio and like multiple daily sessions, just crazy stuff. Like it might be okay in the short run. But what I like to look at is if you can't get a person to at least a relatively lean-ish point where they're maybe like 10 weeks out without doing all those things, then it's not worth it. Because yes, you can add those things in, but they're still not going to be ready, and it's just going to create further negative adaptation. I've had that situation where someone would be like, I'm making changes, and I knew this person was kind of metabolically compromised, so I wasn't sure how they would respond, but like, look, let's try it, see what happens, we'll make the call later. I'm sorry, there's this damn fly flying back and forth. But I make several sets of changes, even implement like refeeding and things like that, and nothing happens at all. even after multiple, like 4 or 5 sets of changes, they're like, well, probably need fat burners and this. I'm like, look, you can't even drop 2 pounds or a pound or 3 or whatever, or anything without like extreme measures. If that's happening, then that's a bad sign. Bad sign. But if someone's still making progress and still responding, even if the changes are pretty extreme, then it's probably okay short term, right? That's kind of how I like to look at it. It's the best description I can give. I pulled out a prep before. I had the adrenal insufficiency issue. I canned it because of that. That was one. People with just like general metabolic and issues and things like I just mentioned before, canned. You know, I mean, it's like saying if someone's behind, they're 6 weeks out, but they look 12. Well, how good are they responding? Are they responding good? Well, we might be able to make it in 6. We might be able to just double it up and go for it. But if they're not responding, if they are behind because they're not responding good and they're still 6 weeks behind, there's no way. I mean, they're not going to make it. They're not going to look good. You're just going to dig such a big hole for nothing. So no, can it, later show, don't do a show, whatever it might be. So hope that helps. I know that's not like, if this happens, don't prep or something, but I mean, I think that gives at least a decent idea. And it's a hard conversation to have with people for sure. So let's see, I'm trying to find this other one. Why I'm looking for this other one. I also like to tell people, you know, too, ultimately our goal is to look their best. You know, I put my name on something, they put their name on something, we want to go in their best. If I don't think they're going to, for whatever reason, then let's not do it or do a different one or something, right? So that's normally my take. All right. Last one. Can you create a deficit from cardio while keeping calories reasonably high? Sure, you could. I mean, yeah, on paper, a deficit's a deficit. I will say that some people seem to adapt a little more to cardio or adapt a little more to the food, and using one or the other seems to work a little bit better, even though the numbers on paper might be the same. Kind of maybe comes down to that adaptation or stress from one or the other. But yeah, I mean, if you burn 500 calories a day from cardio and leave your food the same, then on paper you should burn 3,500 calories a week. A pound, give or take. I know it's not exact. Calm down. So yeah, I mean, you could, but I mean, there's always context. If someone's eating, if they like it and they have like extra time and they're not overly stressed from training or poor sleep or anything, and you want to add the activity instead of pulling the food, then sure. Some other people, personally, I would rather eat less and do less cardio. Now, I always end up eating less and doing more cardio. It always ends up being both. But I'm saying if I had the choice, I would definitely rather eat less and do less cardio, because I'm just get so beat up from doing so much cardio anyhow that I would rather keep that stressor lower and preserve my body a little bit more and just eat a little bit less food. But again, preference and context for sure. So that's it, guys. Like I said, there was a couple in there that I didn't answer, but please just add them to the next one. We're already at like 30 minutes, so just throw those on the next one. I'll leave it an open one next time, and we will get them all. All right, thank you.